Please don't take me away from my mommy." The words hung in the sterile air of the Federal Immigration Office in downtown Chicago like a prayer that nobody wanted to hear. "Welcome back, and tell me what city you're watching from or what time it is. Enjoy this story that might change how you see the invisible people around us." 10-year-old Noah Martinez stood frozen in the middle of the waiting room, his small frame dwarfed by the towering bureaucratic machinery that surrounded him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, with the relentless hum of institutional indifference, casting harsh shadows across rows of plastic chairs filled with people clutching documents, hope and desperation in equal measure. His tiny fingers gripped a wrinkled plastic bag containing 2 precious papers, his birth certificate and his mother's medical records, along with a broken rosary that had been his grandmother's last gift before she passed away in Guatemala. The immigration officer behind the bulletproof glass partition, a stern woman in her 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the expression of someone who had processed thousands of cases without allowing herself to see the human faces behind them, tapped her pen impatiently against her clipboard. Her nameplate read Officer Patricia Williams, and she wore her authority like armor, protecting herself from the emotional weight of the stories that passed through her station every day. "Name?" she repeated for the 3rd time, her voice growing louder and more irritated with each repetition. The word echoed through the waiting room, bouncing off walls painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who spent too much time looking at it. But Noah couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his tongue thick and useless in his mouth. The English words his mother had made him practice for weeks, "My name is Noah Martinez, and I need help for my sick mother," had completely disappeared from his mind, leaving behind only the terrifying blankness of a child overwhelmed by circumstances far too large for his young shoulders to bear. The waiting room fell into that particular kind of silence that occurs when public embarrassment becomes entertainment for bored strangers. People shifted in their seats, craning their necks to get a better view of the small drama unfolding before them. Some whispered to their companions, their voices carrying just loud enough for Noah to hear fragments of judgment. "Whose kid is this? Where are his parents? Someone should do something." A businessman in an expensive suit checked his Rolex with theatrical impatience, muttering to his lawyer about how these situations always seem to slow down the process for legitimate cases. A woman clutching her designer purse looked at Noah with the kind of distaste usually reserved for something unpleasant tracked in on someone's shoe, whispering to her companion, "I can't believe they let strays wander in here without supervision." Noah's hoodie, a faded blue garment 3 sizes too large for his thin frame, hung on him like a tent. It had belonged to his father, who had died in a construction accident 2 years earlier, leaving behind only debts and dreams of bringing his family to America. The hoodie still carried faint traces of his mother's perfume, a cheap drugstore brand she had saved up to buy for special occasions, back when they still believed special occasions would come. The security guard, a heavy-set man whose uniform strained against his belly and whose patience had been worn thin by years of dealing with what he considered problem cases, stepped forward with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who took pleasure in exercising what little authority he possessed. His hand rested on his radio, ready to call for backup if this situation escalated beyond his ability to control. "Ma'am," he said to Officer Williams, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed he was solving a problem rather than creating a bigger one, "the kid's been standing there for 10 minutes without saying anything. He's holding up the line. Should I escort him out?" Noah didn't run, though every instinct in his small body screamed at him to flee. He had learned, through months of navigating adult spaces where children like him were unwelcome, that running only made things worse. Instead, he stood there shivering despite the oppressive heat of the overcrowded office, his dark eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from understanding that your entire world depends on convincing strangers to care about you. His mother, Eleanor, lay dying on a thin mattress in a shelter basement 6 blocks away, her body finally surrendering to an infection that had been eating away at her for weeks. She had used the last of her strength that morning to dress Noah in his cleanest clothes, to press the precious documents into his hands, to whisper the English sentences she had made him practice until they became muscle memory. "Go, mijo," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper as she pressed her lips to his forehead one last time. "Show them the papers. Say the words. Save us both." Her fever had been so high that her kiss burned against his skin like a brand, marking him with her desperation and love. They had crossed the border 3 months earlier, part of a group of families fleeing the violence that had consumed their small town in Honduras. Elena had sold everything, her wedding ring, her husband's tools, even her own blood, to an illegal clinic, to pay the coyotes who promised to guide them to safety. She had carried Noah across rivers and through desert nights, her body shielding his from thorns and cold and the fear that followed them like a shadow. But America had not been the sanctuary she had imagined. Instead of open arms and opportunity, they had found endless lines, hostile officials, and a system designed to process people rather than help them. Eleanor's visitor visa had expired while they waited for their asylum hearing, transforming them from desperate refugees into illegals with the stroke of a bureaucratic pen. The shelter where they had been staying, a converted warehouse basement that smelled of mold and desperation, had told them to leave when Elena's cough became too persistent, when her fever made other residents nervous about contagion. "We're not a hospital," the manager had said, his face carefully composed into an expression of regret that fooled no one. "We have other families to think about." So they had spent the last 2 weeks sleeping in doorways and park benches, Elena growing weaker, while Noah tried to figure out how to become the adult their situation required him to be. She had given him her share of food, insisted he take the only blanket, and used her body as a windbreak when the Chicago cold cut through their inadequate clothing like knives. "Tomorrow," she had whispered to him just that morning, her voice raspy and thin. "Tomorrow you go to the immigration office. You tell them what we practiced. You can do this, mijo. You're braver than you know." But standing in that fluorescent-lit purgatory, surrounded by the casual cruelty of people who saw him as an inconvenience, rather than a child in crisis, Noah felt anything but brave. He felt small and lost, and utterly alone, carrying the weight of his mother's life in a plastic bag that suddenly seemed impossibly heavy for his thin arms to hold. The officer behind the glass was already reaching for the stamp that would mark his case as incomplete, the bureaucratic equivalent of a death sentence for people like him and his mother. The security guard was stepping closer, his hand moving toward Noah's shoulder, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had removed countless unwanted people from official spaces. And in that moment, when it seemed like the entire system was preparing to dispose of one more inconvenient child, a voice called out from the far corner of the room, cutting through the murmur of official indifference like a blade through silk. "Wait!" Everyone turned toward the voice that had cut through the institutional silence like a warm hand reaching into a frozen room. She stood in the far corner where the fluorescent lights flickered and cast uneven shadows, a woman who had become so much a part of the building's architecture that most people looked right through her without seeing. Linda Vasquez was 63 years old, though the years of early mornings and late nights had carved deep lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, secured with an elastic band that had seen better days. She wore thick glasses with frames that had been repaired multiple times with clear tape, and her uniform, a simple gray shirt and dark pants, bore the insignia of Henderson Cleaning Services, the company that had employed her for the past 18 years. Her cleaning cart stood beside her like a faithful companion, filled with the tools of her trade, industrial-strength disinfectant, paper towels, trash bags, and a mop that had cleaned thousands of square feet of government floors. To the officials and visitors who passed through these halls daily, she was invisible, just another piece of the bureaucratic machinery that kept the building functioning, as unremarkable and unnoticed as the heating vents or the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls. But Linda saw everything. She had been working in this building since 2006, arriving each morning at 5 a.m., when the offices were empty, and the only sounds were the hum of computers left running overnight and the distant rumble of traffic beginning to build on the Chicago streets outside. She had witnessed thousands of stories unfold in these rooms, moments of joy when families were reunited, scenes of heartbreak when applications were denied, and the quiet desperation of people like Noah who found themselves caught in a system that seemed designed to break rather than heal. The security guard, whose name was Marcus and who had never bothered to learn Linda's name, despite working in the same building for over a decade, looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, please return to your duties. This is an official matter." Linda didn't move, Instead, she set down her spray bottle with deliberate care and walked toward Noah with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that the most important work often happened in the spaces between official procedures. Her sneakers, white canvas shoes that she bleached every weekend to maintain their professional appearance, made soft, squeaking sounds against the polished linoleum floor. "I'll talk to him," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including Officer Williams, who had paused with her rejection stamp halfway to Noah's paperwork. Marcus stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to—" But Linda was already kneeling in front of Noah, bringing herself down to his eye level with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years cleaning low spaces and understood the importance of meeting people where they were. She didn't reach for him or invade his personal space. Instead, she simply looked at him with eyes that held decades of accumulated kindness. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent that spoke of her own journey to this country many years ago. "Do you speak Spanish?" The transformation in Noah's face was immediate and profound. His eyes, which had been wide with terror just moments before, suddenly lit up with something that might have been hope. He nodded slowly, his small head moving up and down, as if he were afraid that speaking might break whatever magic had just occurred. Linda smiled, not the professional smile that service workers learn to wear like uniforms, but something genuine and warm that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made her whole face seem to glow with an inner light. "Good," she said, switching seamlessly into Spanish, her voice taking on a different quality, more musical and flowing. "Can you tell me your name, mijo?" The Spanish words seemed to unlock something in Noah's chest that had been tightly closed since he'd entered the building. "Noah," he whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying a universe of relief. "Noah Martinez. That's a beautiful name," Linda replied, still speaking in Spanish, still maintaining that careful distance that allowed him to feel safe. "Can you tell me where your mama is, Noah?" And then the words came pouring out, not in the careful practiced English sentences his mother had taught him, but in rapid, emotional Spanish that tumbled over itself in its urgency. He told her about the shelter basement, about his mother's fever, about the long journey from Honduras and the men who had promised safety but delivered only more fear. He spoke of sleeping in doorways and sharing half a sandwich, of watching his mother grow weaker while pretending to be strong for his sake. Linda listened to every word, her face reflecting each emotion that crossed Noah's features. She had heard similar stories many times over the years, whispered conversations in bathroom stalls when people thought no one was listening, desperate phone calls made from courthouse steps, fragments of anguish spoken in languages that the officials pretended not to understand. The waiting room had fallen completely silent. Even the businessman with the expensive watch had stopped checking the time, his attention caught by the sight of a cleaning woman conducting what appeared to be the most important conversation happening in the building that day. Officer Williams sat frozen behind her glass partition, her stamp still poised in mid-air, watching this unexpected drama unfold. When Noah finished speaking, his small body shaking with the effort of finally releasing the words he had been carrying, Linda stood up slowly. Her knees protested after kneeling on the hard floor, but she ignored the discomfort. She turned to face the room, and when she spoke, her voice carried a clarity and authority that seemed to transform her from invisible custodian into something approaching a force of nature. "His name is Noah Martinez," she announced in English, her accent more pronounced now but her words crystal clear. "He is 10 years old. His mother is dying 6 blocks from here in a basement shelter. She is sick with infection and fever, and she sent her son here because she believes in America. She believes that we help children who need help." The businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A woman in a designer suit suddenly found something fascinating about her manicured fingernails. Marcus, the security guard, looked as if he wished he could disappear entirely. Linda continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have been cleaning this building for 18 years. I have seen thousands of people come through these doors. Most of them are scared. All of them are hoping for kindness. This boy walked 6 blocks through the cold Chicago morning to ask for help, and we are going to give it to him." She turned to Officer Williams, who was still holding the rejection stamp as if it had suddenly become too heavy to use. "I am going to go find his mother and bring her here. Will you please make sure this boy has a chair and maybe a cup of water while I'm gone?" Without waiting for an answer, Linda abandoned her cleaning cart and headed for the exit with purposeful strides. Marcus made a half-hearted attempt to stop her. "Ma'am, you can't just leave during work hours." But Linda was already pushing through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the November cold without a coat, driven by an urgency that had nothing to do with government regulations and everything to do with the simple, radical belief that every child deserved to have someone fight for them. Behind her, the immigration office sat in stunned silence. Noah remained standing in the same spot, but something in his posture had changed. He no longer looked like a small animal trapped in a maze. He looked like a boy whose prayers had been answered by an angel, disguised as a janitor. Officer Williams slowly set down her stamp and reached for her phone. For the first time in her 15-year career, she was about to make a call that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with doing what was right. Outside, Linda Vasquez ran through the streets of Chicago, her cleaning uniform a gray blur against the autumn landscape, carrying with her the kind of faith that moves mountains and opens locked doors. The faith of someone who had learned that the most powerful force in the world was simply refusing to walk past someone in pain. Linda's lungs burned as she ran through the maze of Chicago's downtown streets, her breath forming small clouds in the November air. Her cleaning uniform, designed for the controlled environment of office buildings, offered little protection against the bitter wind that cut through the urban canyon of glass and steel. She had left her coat in her locker, never imagining when she arrived for work that morning that she would be sprinting through the city on a mission that had nothing to do with disinfectant and everything to do with saving a life. The basement shelter Noah had described was located in a converted warehouse 6 blocks away, but Linda knew these streets better than most people realized. During her 18 years of cleaning government buildings, she had learned the geography of desperation that existed in the shadows of official Chicago, the places where people went when the system failed them, the addresses that never appeared on tourist maps but housed the city's most vulnerable residents. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she ran. Henderson Cleaning Services, no doubt wondering where their most reliable employee had disappeared to in the middle of her shift. Linda had never missed a day of work in over 3 years, had never left her post without permission, had never given her supervisors any reason to question her dedication. But today, for the first time in her adult life, she simply didn't care about the consequences of abandoning her responsibilities. The warehouse that housed the shelter looked like dozens of other abandoned buildings in this part of the city. Red brick facade stained with decades of urban neglect, windows covered with plywood or mesh screens, loading docks that hadn't seen commercial activity in years. A small hand-painted sign near a side entrance read, "New Beginnings Transitional Housing." The words faded and partially obscured by graffiti tags that spoke of the neighborhood's ongoing struggles with poverty and displacement. Linda pushed through the heavy metal door and immediately hit by the smell, a combination of industrial disinfectant, unwashed bodies, and the particular odor of too many people living in too small a space without adequate ventilation. The basement had been divided into makeshift rooms using hanging sheets and pieces of plywood, creating a labyrinth of temporary privacy that housed families who had nowhere else to go. A tired-looking woman in her 40s approached Linda with the wary expression of someone who had learned to be suspicious of unexpected visitors. Her name tag identified her as Carmen Rodriguez, shelter coordinator, and her eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from managing impossible situations with inadequate resources. "Excuse me," Linda said, still catching her breath from her sprint through the city. "I'm looking for a woman named Elena Martinez. She's sick and her son—" "Elena?" Carmen's expression immediately shifted from suspicious to concerned. "She's in the back corner. We told them they had to leave this morning. She's too sick and we don't have medical facilities. The other residents are worried about contagion." Linda felt her heart sink. "Where is she now?" Carmen gestured toward the far end of the basement, where the makeshift rooms gave way to a storage area filled with broken furniture and discarded belongings. "She couldn't move. We gave her until tonight to figure something out, but—" She shrugged helplessly, the gesture conveying volumes about the impossible choices that people in her position faced every day. Linda found Elena in what could barely be called a room, a space barely large enough for a single mattress, enclosed by hanging blankets that provided the illusion of privacy, but no protection from the cold air that seeped through the building's foundation. Eleanor lay on her side, her dark hair matted with sweat, her breathing shallow and labored. Even in the dim light provided by a single bare bulb, Linda could see that the woman was critically ill. "Eleanor," Linda said softly, kneeling beside the mattress. "Eleanor, I'm here about Noah." Eleanor's eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus on Linda's face. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, each word requiring tremendous effort. "Noah, is he? Did they?" "He's safe," Linda assured her, reaching out to touch Elena's fevered forehead. Her skin was burning hot and dry, indicating severe dehydration and infection. "He's at the immigration office. He told them about you. I came to help." Elena tried to sit up, her body responding to the mention of her son with a mother's instinct that transcended physical weakness. "I have to... He needs the papers." "The papers are with him," Linda said gently, helping Eleanor lie back down. "But right now, you need medical attention. We're going to get you to a hospital." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that she didn't have the strength to shed. "No money, but no insurance. They won't..." Linda pulled out her phone, her fingers working quickly to dial 911. As she waited for the operator to answer, she studied Elena's face and saw something that reminded her powerfully of her own journey to America 35 years earlier. The same desperate hope mixed with bone-deep exhaustion, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for a child's future. 911, what's your emergency? "I need an ambulance at 1247 Industrial Avenue, the New Beginnings shelter. I have a woman here who's critically ill with what appears to be a severe infection. She needs immediate medical attention." "What's your relationship to the patient, ma'am?" Linda hesitated for just a moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "She's family." While they waited for the ambulance, Linda sat with Eleanor, using a damp cloth from the shelter's communal bathroom to cool her fever, and speaking to her in Spanish about Noah's bravery, about how proud she should be of the son she had raised. Elena's responses became increasingly fragmentary, but she held onto Linda's hand with surprising strength. Carmen appeared in the doorway, her expression conflicted. "The ambulance is here, but they're asking about payment authorization and insurance information. Elena doesn't have..." "I'll handle it," Linda said firmly, standing up from beside the mattress. She had exactly $847 in her savings account, money she had been setting aside to visit her own grandchildren in California. It wouldn't cover major medical expenses, but it might be enough to ensure that Elena received initial treatment. The paramedics who arrived were professionals, a young man named David and an older woman named Patricia, who took one look at Eleanor and immediately began preparing her for transport. They asked the standard questions about medical history and allergies, questions that Elena was too weak to answer, and that Linda couldn't answer for her. "We're taking her to St. Mary's," Patricia informed Linda as they loaded Eleanor onto the stretcher. "It's the closest facility that accepts uninsured patients. Are you riding with us?" Linda looked back toward the shelter entrance, thinking about Noah waiting at the immigration office, probably wondering if she would return or if he had been abandoned once again by an adult world that seemed designed to fail children like him. "Yes," she said, climbing into the ambulance. "But first I need to make a phone call." As the ambulance pulled away from the warehouse, sirens wailing, Linda dialed the immigration office. Officer Williams answered on the second ring, her voice carrying an unusual note of uncertainty. "This is Linda Vasquez," Linda said, raising her voice over the sound of the sirens. "I found Noah's mother. We're taking her to St. Mary's Hospital. She's very sick, but she's alive. Can you please tell Noah that his mama is going to be okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Vasquez, where exactly are you? Your supervisor has been calling, and there are some people here who want to speak with you." Linda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "What kind of people?" "Child Services," Officer Williams replied. "They want to discuss Noah's placement while his mother is hospitalized." The ambulance hit a pothole, jostling Eleanor's stretcher and causing the monitors to beep alarmingly. Linda gripped the phone tighter, watching the paramedics work to stabilize a woman whose only crime had been believing that America would help her save her child. "Tell them," Linda said, her voice growing harder with each word, "that Noah's placement has already been arranged. Tell them his family is taking care of him." "But Miss Vasquez, according to our records, Noah doesn't have any family in the United States." Linda looked down at Elena's fevered face, at this woman who had sacrificed everything to give her son a chance at a better life, and made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. "He does now," she said, and hung up the phone. Outside the ambulance windows, Chicago rushed past in a blur of lights and motion, carrying them toward a hospital where miracles happened every day for people who could afford them, and where Linda was about to discover exactly how much her word was worth when measured against a system designed to protect institutions rather than individuals. When Linda returned to the immigration office 3 hours later, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had been a routine government building filled with the usual bureaucratic indifference had transformed into something resembling a battlefield, with Noah as the prize that multiple agencies had decided to claim. 2 women in dark business suits stood near Officer Williams's desk, their briefcases and clipboards arranged with military precision. Their name badges identified them as Jessica Morton and Sandra Kim from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. Both women radiated the particular kind of authority that came from years of making decisions about other people's children, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that professionals learned when their job required them to separate families on a regular basis. Noah sat in a plastic chair that was too big for his small frame, looking even more lost than he had that morning. Someone had given him a juice box and a package of crackers, institutional kindness that felt more like a last meal than genuine care. His dark eyes followed Linda as she entered the building, hope and fear warring across his features in equal measure. "Ms. Vasquez?" Officer Williams called out, her voice carrying a note of relief that suggested the last 3 hours had been considerably more complicated than her usual Tuesday afternoon. "Could you please join us? These ladies from Child Services have some questions about your relationship to Noah." Linda approached the group with the deliberate pace of someone who had spent decades navigating hostile bureaucracies. Her cleaning uniform was rumpled from her sprint through the city and her time in the ambulance, and she could feel the weight of disapproving stares from the other visitors in the waiting room. But her shoulders were straight, and her eyes were clear as she faced the 2 social workers. Jessica Morton, the older of the 2 women, consulted her tablet with the efficiency of someone who processed dozens of similar cases every week. "Ms. Vasquez, I understand you've claimed to be related to Noah Martinez. However, our preliminary investigation shows no family connection between you and this child. Can you explain your statement to Officer Williams?" Linda looked down at Noah, who was clutching his juice box like a lifeline and watching the adult conversation that would determine his fate. She thought about Eleanor lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life while strangers debated whether her son deserved to stay with someone who cared about him or disappear into a system that viewed him as a case number rather than a human being. "Noah's mother is in the hospital because I got her there," Linda said quietly. "I found her dying in a basement because her son was brave enough to ask for help. If that doesn't make us family, then your definition of family is too small." Sandra Kim looked up from her own tablet, her expression skeptical. "Ms. Vasquez, we appreciate your concern for this child, but family placement requires documented relationships. Are you saying you're related by blood or marriage to Noah or his mother?" "No," Linda answered honestly. "I'm saying that sometimes family is what you choose to create, when the people who are supposed to help decide to look the other way instead." The 2 social workers exchanged glances that spoke of shared experience with well-meaning civilians who didn't understand the complexities of child welfare law. Jessica Morton's voice took on the patient tone that professionals used when explaining difficult realities to people they considered naive. "Ms. Vasquez, I understand your emotional investment in this situation, but we have protocols that exist to protect children. Noah needs to be placed in a licensed foster home while his mother recovers and while his immigration status is resolved. We've already identified a family that specializes in temporary placements for children in similar circumstances." "What kind of circumstances?" Linda asked, her voice developing an edge that made several people in the waiting room look up from their paperwork. "Children whose parents are unable to provide adequate care," Sandra Kim replied carefully, her language chosen to avoid the more direct truth that Noah was about to be separated from the only parent he had ever known because she had committed the crime of being poor and sick in America. Linda felt something shift inside her chest, not breaking but hardening into something that felt like steel. She had spent 63 years learning to accept the limitations that other people placed on her life, to work within systems that were designed to keep people like her invisible and voiceless. But standing in that government office, watching strangers discuss Noah's future as if he were a piece of property to be transferred, she discovered that acceptance had its limits. "And what happens to children in these temporary placements?" she asked, her voice growing louder with each word. Do they get to visit their mothers in the hospital? Do they get to speak Spanish when they're scared? Do they get to sleep at night knowing that someone loves them more than their next paycheck or performance evaluation? The questions hung in the air like accusations, and Linda could see that her words had hit their mark. Sandra Kim shifted uncomfortably, while Jessica Morton's professional mask slipped just enough to reveal the discomfort underneath. "Ms. Vasquez," Officer Williams interjected, clearly hoping to diffuse the tension that was building in her waiting room. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "No," Linda said firmly. "This conversation affects Noah, so Noah gets to hear it. He's 10 years old, not an object you can move around without his input." She knelt down in front of Noah's chair, bringing herself to his eye level just as she had earlier that morning. But this time, when she spoke to him in Spanish, her voice carried the weight of someone making promises she intended to keep. "Mijo," she said softly, "these ladies want to take you to live with strangers while your mama gets better. They say it's the law. What do you want to do?" Noah's answer came without hesitation, his small voice carrying across the waiting room with startling clarity. "I want to stay with you, Abuela Linda. Please don't let them take me away." The word abuela, grandmother, fell into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the room. Several people in the waiting area looked up from their paperwork, their expressions softening as they witnessed a child claiming an adult who had chosen to fight for him. Jessica Morton cleared her throat, her professional composure slightly shaken by Noah's emotional plea. "Ms. Vasquez, we understand that you've developed a bond with this child, but the reality is that you have no legal standing to challenge our custody determination. You're not a licensed foster parent. You have no previous relationship with the family, and you're—" "I'm what?" Linda interrupted, standing up to face the social worker directly. "I'm a cleaning lady. I'm poor. I'm not educated enough to love a child who needs someone to love him." The challenge in Linda's voice made the entire waiting room fall silent. Even the businessman, who had been complaining about delays earlier that morning, seemed transfixed by the confrontation unfolding before him. Sandra Kim attempted to restore professional control to the conversation. "Ms. Vasquez, this isn't about your personal qualifications. This is about legal procedures that exist to ensure children's safety and welfare. We have licensed families who are equipped to handle the specific needs of immigrant children in crisis situations." "Equipped with what?" Linda demanded. "Forms? Background checks? Training seminars about cultural sensitivity? Because I can tell you what Noah needs right now. And it's not another stranger explaining to him why the system knows better than his heart." Officer Williams stood up from behind her desk, clearly uncomfortable with the way the situation was escalating beyond her ability to manage. "Perhaps we should contact your supervisor, Ms. Vasquez. This seems like a matter that requires—" The door to the immigration office swung open with enough force to make everyone turn toward the entrance. Marcus, the security guard who had tried to stop Linda from leaving earlier, entered with a man in an expensive suit, whose presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the room. "Ms. Vasquez," Marcus said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed he was about to see justice served, "this is Mr. Henderson, from Henderson Cleaning Services. He's here about your unauthorized departure from your assigned duties." Robert Henderson was a thin man in his 50s, whose success in the commercial cleaning industry had convinced him that efficiency and profit margins were more important than the human complications that occasionally disrupted smooth operations. He approached Linda with the expression of someone preparing to resolve an unfortunate personnel matter as quickly and quietly as possible. "Linda," he said, his voice carrying the forced familiarity that supervisors used when they wanted to appear reasonable while wielding absolute power, "I need you to come with me. We need to discuss your employment status and the events of this afternoon." Linda looked around the room, at Noah's terrified face, at the social workers preparing to take him away, at the immigration officer who had the power to stamp his future with rejection, at her boss who was about to fire her for the crime of caring more about a child than about cleaning supplies. For 63 years she had accepted that this was how the world worked, that people like her were expected to stay in their designated spaces, to clean up other people's messes without asking why those messes existed in the first place, to remain invisible while the important people made decisions about life and death and family. But today, looking at Noah's face, Linda Vasquez made a decision that would change everything. "No," she said simply. The single word dropped into the silence like a declaration of war. The word no hung in the air like a challenge to the natural order of things. Robert Henderson's face flushed red with the kind of indignation that came from having an employee, especially a cleaning lady, refuse a direct order in front of witnesses. His entire business model depended on workers who understood their place in the hierarchy, who accepted their roles without question, who could be counted on to prioritize their paychecks over whatever personal complications might arise during working hours. "Excuse me?" Henderson's voice rose an octave, attracting stares from everyone in the waiting room. "Linda, I think you misunderstood. This isn't a request. You abandoned your post, left the building without authorization, and caused a significant disruption to our contract with this facility. You need to come with me now, or you'll be terminated immediately." Linda stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her cleaning uniform that had become a symbol of everything the people in this room thought they knew about her worth and her place in the world. But something in her posture had changed since that morning. She stood taller somehow, as if the act of choosing Noah's welfare over her own job security had unlocked a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "Mr. Henderson," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "I have worked for your company for 18 years. I have never missed a day without calling in sick. I have never left early. I have never caused problems or complaints. I have cleaned blood, vomit, and tears out of these government buildings, and I have done it with dignity, because someone has to care about making these places clean for the people who come here looking for help." She paused, looking around the room at the faces watching her, some sympathetic, others uncomfortable, all of them witnessing a woman who had spent decades being invisible, suddenly demanding to be seen. "But today," Linda continued, "I found a dying woman and her terrified son, and I chose to help them instead of mopping floors. If that makes me unemployable in your eyes, then I accept the consequences." Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. In his 15 years of running a cleaning service, he had never encountered an employee who would sacrifice job security for strangers, who would choose principle over paycheck with such calm certainty. "You're fired," he said finally, his voice carrying the vindictive satisfaction of someone reasserting control over a situation that had spiraled beyond his understanding. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Marcus stepped forward eagerly, clearly relishing the opportunity to remove someone who had caused him so much inconvenience throughout the day. But before he could reach Linda, Noah jumped up from his chair with surprising speed and wrapped his small arms around her waist, clinging to her with the desperate strength of a child who had already lost too much. "Don't let them take Abuela Linda away," he cried in Spanish, his voice breaking with emotion. "Please, she's the only one who helped us." The sight of a 10-year-old boy defending an adult who was about to lose her job for helping him seemed to affect everyone in the room differently. The businessman with the expensive watch shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding his paperwork fascinating. A young mother waiting with her own children pulled them closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Even Officer Williams seemed to be struggling with emotions that had no place in official proceedings, but Jessica Morton from Child Services remained unmoved. "This emotional display doesn't change the legal realities," she said firmly, consulting her tablet as if the device contained wisdom greater than the scene unfolding before her. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for resolving your personnel issue. Now we can proceed with placing Noah in appropriate foster care while his mother recovers." She signaled to Sandra Kim, who opened her briefcase and removed a set of official documents. "Noah, we're going to take you somewhere safe where you can get proper meals and attend school while your mother gets better. The foster family we've selected has experience with children from your cultural background." Linda felt Noah's grip tighten around her waist as he pressed his face against her uniform, trying to make himself invisible. She could feel his small body trembling, and something inside her chest exploded with a fury that she had been containing for 6 decades of accepting other people's definitions of her worth and her place. "His name," she said, her voice cutting through the bureaucratic chatter like a blade, "is Noah Martinez, not this child or the minor or the immigrant boy. His name is Noah, and he is 10 years old, and he just lost his country, his home, and nearly lost his mother. He doesn't need your cultural competency training or your licensed foster family. He needs someone who sees him as a human being instead of a case number." Linda gently disentangled herself from Noah's embrace and knelt down to look him in the eyes one more time. "Mijo," she said softly in Spanish, "I want you to remember something. You are not alone. You are not unwanted. You are not a burden. You are a brave boy who saved his mother's life by being willing to ask for help. She stood up and turned to face the social workers directly. And you, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, you are about to traumatize a child who has already survived more than most adults could handle, and you're doing it because you care more about following procedures than about protecting the people those procedures are supposed to serve. Sandra Kim bristled at the accusation. Ms. Vasquez, you clearly don't understand the complexities of child welfare law. We have extensive experience placing children in situations exactly like Noah's. Licensed foster families undergo months of training and background checks to ensure... To ensure what? Linda interrupted. That they know how to fill out forms? That they've attended seminars about trauma-informed care? Let me tell you what I know about trauma-informed care. I know that you don't separate a scared child from the first person who made him feel safe. I know that you don't punish a mother for being poor and sick by stealing her son. And I know that all your training and all your licenses don't mean anything if you can't see the difference between helping and hurting. The confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone in the building. Other immigration officers had emerged from their offices to witness the unprecedented scene of a cleaning lady lecturing child services about their own procedures. Visitors in the waiting room had abandoned their paperwork to watch the drama unfold. Officer Williams finally stood up from behind her desk, her face pale with the stress of managing a situation that had evolved far beyond anything covered in her training manual. Perhaps we should all take a step back and... No, Linda said again, and this time the word carried the weight of every compromise she had ever made, every time she had stayed silent when she should have spoken, every moment she had accepted less than she deserved, because that was what people like her were supposed to do. No more stepping back, no more looking the other way, no more pretending that following rules is more important than doing what's right. She turned to face the entire room, addressing not just the officials, but every person who had witnessed Noah's ordeal throughout the day. This morning, a brave little boy walked into this building asking for help. He couldn't speak the language, he had no money. He had no lawyers or advocates or anyone to fight for him, except a dying mother who believed that America would help her save her child. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, and Linda realized she was no longer speaking just for Noah, but for every invisible person who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't matter enough to be heard. And what did he find? He found a system that was more interested in processing him than helping him. He found people who saw his desperation as an inconvenience. He found officials who were ready to stamp rejected on his future and send him back to the streets. Linda paused, looking directly at Jessica Morton and Sandra Kim. And now when someone finally did help him, when his mother is getting the medical care she needs, and he has found someone willing to love him, you want to destroy that because it doesn't fit your paperwork. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming as Linda's words settled over the room like a judgment that everyone present would have to answer for. Then from the back of the room came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Everyone turned to see who was applauding, and Linda's breath caught in her throat. Standing near the entrance, wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with unmistakable authority, was a man whose presence immediately commanded respect from everyone in the room. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his eyes held the kind of power that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. But what made Linda's heart skip was not his obvious wealth and influence. It was the fact that she recognized him. 35 years ago, when she was a young immigrant herself, struggling to navigate a system that seemed designed to break rather than help, Linda had found a scared teenage boy hiding in a courthouse bathroom, too frightened to face the judge who would decide his fate. She had sat with him, spoken to him in Spanish, helped him practice the English words he needed to explain his situation. She had walked into that courtroom with him and watched as the system that had seemed so hostile suddenly revealed its capacity for mercy. That terrified teenager was now Judge Michael Rodriguez of the Federal Immigration Court, and he had been listening to every word. Judge Michael Rodriguez continued his slow, deliberate applause as he walked through the immigration office, his presence transforming the atmosphere from one of bureaucratic hostility to something approaching reverence. Every person in the room seemed to recognize instinctively that someone with real authority had entered their midst. Not the petty power of middle management or agency protocols, but the kind of influence that could reshape lives with a single decision. "Magnificent," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to being heard without having to raise his voice. "Absolutely magnificent. I haven't heard a defense of human dignity that eloquent since my law school days." Robert Henderson, who moments earlier had been savoring his ability to fire Linda for insubordination, now looked as if he wished the floor would open and swallow him entirely. His face had gone pale as he realized that his public humiliation of an employee had been witnessed by someone whose opinion could affect his company's government contracts for years to come. Jessica Morton and Sandra Kim exchanged nervous glances, clearly trying to calculate whether the appearance of a federal judge supported or threatened their planned removal of Noah. Their tablets and official protocols suddenly seemed inadequate shields against the penetrating gaze of someone who understood both the letter and the spirit of the laws they claimed to enforce. But Linda felt the world tilt beneath her feet as recognition flooded through her with devastating clarity. The scared 15-year-old boy she had found hiding in a courthouse bathroom 35 years ago had grown into this distinguished man whose very presence commanded respect from everyone in the room. She remembered his terrified face, his broken English, his desperate plea for someone to help him understand why his parents had been deported while he remained trapped in legal limbo. "Miguel," she whispered, using the name he had carried when she first met him, before the system had processed him into case files and official documents. "Is it really you?" Judge Rodriguez smiled, and for a moment the powerful federal official disappeared, replaced by the grateful young man whose life had been changed by a cleaning woman's willingness to sit with him during the darkest hours of his childhood. "Hello, Linda," he said softly, approaching her with the respect due to someone who had shaped his understanding of justice and compassion. "You probably don't remember, but I remember everything," Linda interrupted, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks for the first time since this ordeal began. "You were so scared. Your parents had been taken, and you didn't understand why the system was keeping you but sending them away. You thought it was your fault." The entire room had fallen into complete silence, witnessing a reunion that none of them could have imagined. Even Noah, still clinging to Linda's hand, seemed to sense that something profound was occurring, though he couldn't understand the full significance of what he was witnessing. Judge Rodriguez nodded, his own eyes bright with emotion, as he recalled that terrifying period when his future had hung in the balance of bureaucratic decisions made by strangers who seemed incapable of seeing him as anything more than another file to be processed. "You sat with me for 3 hours," he continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You helped me practice what I needed to say to the judge. You told me that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing what was right even when you were terrified." He turned to address the room, his voice taking on the authority that came from years of presiding over cases that determined whether families stayed together or were torn apart by the machinery of immigration law. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward Linda with obvious respect, "taught me that the most important qualification for helping someone isn't your title or your training or your official authority. It's your willingness to see another human being's pain and decide that you're not going to walk away." The judge's words landed like physical blows on the officials who had spent the day treating Noah as a problem to be managed rather than a child to be protected. Officer Williams shifted uncomfortably behind her desk, while Jessica Morton seemed to be frantically consulting her tablet as if it might contain some protocol for handling federal judges who disagreed with child services procedures. "Your Honor," Sandra Kim began nervously, "we appreciate your perspective, but we have legal obligations regarding the placement of unaccompanied minors." "This woman has no legal standing to—" "This woman," Judge Rodriguez interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet steel that made experienced lawyers think twice before challenging his rulings, "has more legal standing than anyone else in this room, because she's the only person who has consistently acted in this child's best interests." He walked over to where Noah stood beside Linda and knelt down to bring himself to the boy's eye level, with the same gentle courtesy that Linda had shown earlier. When he spoke to Noah, it was in Spanish, his words carrying the warmth of someone who remembered what it felt like to be a scared child in an incomprehensible system. "Hola, Noah. My name is Miguel, but people call me Judge Rodriguez now. A long time ago, when I was about your age, this lady helped me when I was scared and alone. Can you tell me what happened today?" Noah looked up at Linda, who nodded encouragingly and then began to speak in rapid Spanish, his words tumbling over each other in their urgency to tell someone in authority what he had experienced. He described his mother's illness, his terrifying morning at the immigration office, and Linda's appearance like an angel when he thought all hope was lost. As Noah spoke, Judge Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly grave. When the boy finished his account, the judge stood up and turned to face the assembled officials, with the kind of controlled anger that suggested someone was about to face consequences for their actions. "Officer Williams," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone issuing an order rather than making a request, "I want to see this child's file immediately. Every document, every note, every recommendation that has been made regarding his case." Patricia Williams fumbled with her computer keyboard, clearly flustered by the presence of someone whose authority far exceeded her own. "Yes, Your Honor, right away. But I should mention that we were following standard protocols for unaccompanied." "Standard protocols," Judge Rodriguez repeated, his voice laden with the kind of irony that made people wish they had chosen their words more carefully. "That apparently include allowing a critically ill woman to nearly die in a basement shelter, while her 10-year-old son begged for help in a language that no one bothered to understand." He turned his attention to the child services representatives, who had been growing smaller and quieter with each passing moment. "Ms. Morton, Ms. Kim, I'm curious about your assessment that this child requires immediate removal from the care of someone who has already demonstrated her commitment to his welfare." Jessica Morton cleared her throat nervously. "Your Honor, our procedures require that children be placed with licensed foster families who have undergone extensive background checks and training. This woman, however well-intentioned, lacks the proper credentials to—" "What credentials?" Judge Rodriguez asked quietly. "Are required to love a child who needs someone to love him." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the system claimed to represent. Around the room, people who had spent their careers following procedures and enforcing regulations were being forced to confront the possibility that their dedication to rules had blinded them to the human cost of their decisions. Robert Henderson, who had been standing frozen near the entrance since firing Linda, finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I feel I should clarify that Ms. Vasquez was terminated for abandoning her duties, not for helping the child. We have contracts and obligations that—" "Mr. Henderson," Judge Rodriguez said, turning the full weight of his attention toward the cleaning company owner, "am I to understand that you fired this woman for prioritizing a medical emergency over mopping floors?" Henderson's face flushed red as he realized that his decision to publicly humiliate Linda was about to become a very expensive mistake. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds—" "It sounds exactly like what it is," the judge interrupted. "It sounds like a man who values profit over human decency, contracts over compassion, and corporate image over doing what's right." The judge reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, dialing a number with deliberate precision. "Yes, this is Judge Rodriguez. I need to speak with Mayor Johnson immediately about the city's cleaning contracts with Henderson Services." Henderson's face went from red to white so quickly that several people in the room thought he might faint. The judge's phone call was brief and to the point, but its implications were clear to everyone present. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Rodriguez said after ending his call, "you'll be hearing from the mayor's office about the status of your municipal contracts. I've recommended that the city prioritize vendors who demonstrate respect for their employees' moral courage." He turned back to Linda, who was still processing the impossible reversal of fortune she was witnessing. "Linda, I have a question for you. If I were to grant emergency custody of Noah to a responsible adult while his mother recovers and their immigration status is resolved, would you be willing to serve as his temporary guardian?" Linda looked down at Noah, whose face was bright with hope for the first time since she had met him. She thought about her small apartment, her modest savings, her uncertain future now that Henderson had fired her. She thought about the challenges of caring for a traumatized child, the legal complexities of immigration cases, the possibility that she was promising more than she could deliver. Then she looked into Noah's eyes and saw the same desperate hope she had seen in Miguel's face 35 years ago, and she realized that some questions answered themselves. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored." Judge Rodriguez smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just reminded a broken system what justice actually looked like. "Then consider it done." 3 months later, Linda stood in the kitchen of her small apartment, watching Noah carefully measure ingredients for the pancakes that had become their Saturday morning tradition. The December sunlight streamed through windows that she had never bothered to decorate before, but which now held colorful drawings that Noah had made in his new school. Pictures of stick figures holding hands under rainbow skies. Images of hope drawn by a child who was learning to believe in tomorrow again. The apartment itself had been transformed by the presence of someone who needed it to feel like home. Noah's backpack sat by the door, filled with homework assignments written in the English that was becoming stronger every day. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments they had made together from construction paper and glue, each one representing a memory they were building as a family that had chosen each other rather than simply inherited each other. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her color restored and her strength returning daily, though the doctors said it would be months before she was completely well. The infection that had nearly killed her in that basement shelter was gone, eradicated by antibiotics that Judge Rodriguez had ensured she received without concern for insurance coverage or ability to pay. Her legal status remained complex, but Rodriguez had personally overseen the filing of her asylum application, and his reputation carried weight that transformed her from an illegal immigrant into someone whose case received careful, compassionate attention. "Abuela Linda," Noah called out, using the title that had become as natural as breathing. "How many eggs do we need for Mama's pancakes? She likes them extra fluffy." Linda smiled at the sight of the boy who had taught her that family could be created through choice rather than blood, that love was something you gave rather than something you received, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do with your life was simply refuse to walk past someone who needed help. "4 eggs, mijo," she replied, moving to stand beside him at the stove. "And remember what I taught you about the butter, just a little bit, so they don't stick." The morning routine had become precious to all three of them, a ritual of normalcy that felt miraculous after months of uncertainty and fear. Elena was learning English from a tutor that Judge Rodriguez had arranged, while Noah attended a public school where teachers had been briefed on his situation and instructed to provide whatever support he needed to catch up academically and emotionally. But perhaps most remarkably, Linda had discovered that losing her job at Henderson Cleaning Services had opened a door she never could have imagined. Judge Rodriguez had recommended her for a position with a non-profit organization that provided support services to immigrant families navigating the legal system. Her official title was family advocate, but her real job was simply being herself, someone who understood that bureaucracy could either heal or harm, depending on whether the people operating it remembered that their forms and procedures affected real human beings. She worked now in an office where her experience was valued rather than dismissed, where her ability to speak Spanish was considered an asset rather than an irrelevance, where her understanding of what it meant to be invisible in America made her uniquely qualified to help others find their voices and claim their dignity. The salary was modest, barely more than she had earned cleaning government buildings, but the work filled something in her soul that 18 years of mopping floors had never touched. Every day brought new families like Elena and Noah, people who had crossed impossible distances and overcome unimaginable obstacles in pursuit of something as simple and profound as the chance to build a safe life for their children. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Noah ran to answer it with the enthusiasm of a child who had learned that unexpected visitors could bring good news as well as bad. Through the peephole, Linda could see Judge Rodriguez holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of smile that suggested he was delivering news that would change their lives once again. "Miguel!" Noah exclaimed as he opened the door, switching effortlessly between Spanish and English as he had learned to do in conversations with the man who had become like a grandfather to him. "Did you come for pancakes? Mama made extra." "I would love pancakes," Judge Rodriguez replied, stepping into the apartment that had become a symbol of what America could be when it chose compassion over fear, inclusion over exclusion. "But first I have something very important to share with all of you." Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, moving with the careful grace of someone whose body was still remembering how to be strong. Her relationship with Judge Rodriguez had evolved from desperate gratitude to genuine friendship, based on their shared understanding of what it meant to be saved by strangers who chose to see their humanity rather than their legal status. "Please sit down," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone preparing to deliver news that would require time to fully comprehend. "I wanted to be the one to tell you that Elena's asylum application has been approved, officially and permanently. You are now legal residents of the United States with a clear path to citizenship." The silence that followed was profound and complete. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth as tears began streaming down her cheeks. Not the tears of desperation that had marked her arrival in this country, but tears of relief so deep they seemed to come from her very soul. Noah looked between the adults, understanding that something monumental had occurred, but not yet grasping the full magnitude of what he was hearing. "What does that mean exactly?" Linda asked quietly, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It means," Judge Rodriguez explained, his own voice thick with emotion, "that Elena and Noah can stay here legally, permanently, without fear of deportation or separation. It means Noah can attend school, Elena can work, and they can build the life they dreamed of when they made that dangerous journey across the border." Elena stood up slowly and walked to where Linda sat, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. "Linda," she said in heavily accented but clearly understood English, "you saved our lives, not just our bodies, but our hope, our future, our family." The word family hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went far beyond legal definitions or biological connections. Over the past 3 months, they had created something that couldn't be captured in official documents, a unit bound together by choice, sacrifice, and love that had been tested by circumstances that would have broken weaker bonds. Judge Rodriguez cleared his throat gently. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling additional papers from his envelope. "Linda, the mayor's office has been reviewing city contracts in light of recent events. Henderson Cleaning Services has lost several major accounts, including all their government buildings. The new vendor they've selected has specifically requested to hire you as their site supervisor for federal facilities, at a salary that reflects your experience and value." Linda stared at the job offer, reading numbers that seemed impossible. The position would pay nearly 3 times what she had earned as a cleaner, with benefits that included health insurance, retirement contributions, and paid vacation time. Luxuries she had never dared to imagine might be available to someone like her. But more than the money, more than the professional recognition, the offer represented something she had never experienced in 40 years of working: the acknowledgement that her judgment and character were worth more than her willingness to remain invisible and uncomplaining. "There's no pressure to accept," Rodriguez continued. "Your current position with the Immigrant Advocacy Center is important work, and I know how much you've come to value it. But I wanted you to know that your actions that day in the immigration office have had consequences far beyond what any of us imagined." Linda looked around her small apartment, at Noah stirring pancake batter with intense concentration, at Elena wiping tears of joy from her eyes, at Judge Rodriguez, whose presence reminded her that kindness planted in one generation could bloom in the next. She thought about the choice she had made 3 months ago to abandon her cleaning cart and run through the streets of Chicago to save a dying woman she had never met. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything: her job, her security, her carefully constructed life of invisible service and quiet acceptance. But sitting in this transformed space, surrounded by the family she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return, Linda realized that sometimes what felt like an ending was actually the first day of a completely different story. "I'm happy where I am," she said finally, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own judgment. "Helping families like ours, that's not just a job. That's a calling." Noah looked up from his mixing bowl, his face bright with the kind of joy that children radiate when they feel completely safe and unconditionally loved. "Abuela Linda," he said in English that was becoming more fluent every day. "Are we going to be together forever?" Linda reached over and ruffled his hair with hands that had spent decades cleaning other people's messes, but had finally found their true purpose in building something beautiful from scratch. "Forever and always, mijo," she replied. "We're family now, and family means never having to face tomorrow alone." Outside the apartment windows, Chicago continued its relentless pace, filled with people pursuing their own versions of the American dream. But inside this small space, 3 people who had found each other in the darkest moment of their lives were creating something that couldn't be measured in dollars or documented in official files. They were proving that love multiplied rather than divided when shared, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to let someone suffer alone. 1 year later, Linda found herself standing once again in the Federal Immigration Office in downtown Chicago, but this time everything was different. The harsh, fluorescent lights that had once buzzed with institutional indifference now seemed warmer somehow. Or perhaps it was simply that she was seeing them through eyes that had learned to find hope in the most unlikely places. She wore a navy blue dress that Elena had helped her choose, professional but kind, authoritative but approachable. Her new position as senior family advocate had earned her the respect of officials who once looked through her as if she were invisible, and today she was here on official business, representing a family whose story was heartbreakingly familiar. Beside her stood Maria Santos, a young mother from El Salvador, whose 8-year-old daughter Carmen clung to her hand with the same desperate grip that Noah had once maintained. Carmen's father had been killed by gang violence, and Maria had made the impossible journey north with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a faith that America would protect children whose only crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Remember what we practiced," Linda said softly to Carmen in Spanish, kneeling down to the child's eye level with the same gentle patience she had learned from years of helping frightened children navigate systems that seemed designed to overwhelm rather than welcome them. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave enough to tell your truth." Carmen nodded solemnly, her dark eyes wide with the kind of fear that had become all too familiar to Linda over the past year. As senior family advocate, she had worked with over 100 families, each carrying their own version of desperation and hope, each reminding her of the day when Noah had stood frozen in this same building, unable to speak the words that might save his mother's life. The immigration officer behind the familiar bulletproof glass was new, a young woman named Sarah Chen, whose compassionate approach to her work had made her Linda's favorite person to work with in the building. Sarah understood that the people who came to her window were human beings first and case numbers second, and she had worked closely with Linda to ensure that language barriers and cultural misunderstandings didn't prevent families from accessing the help they desperately needed. "Good morning, Ms. Vasquez," Sarah said with genuine warmth as Linda approached her station. "Is this the Santos family we discussed?" "Yes," Linda replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "Maria and Carmen Santos. Their paperwork is complete, and they have legal representation through our office." As she handed over the carefully prepared documents, Linda caught sight of her reflection in the bulletproof glass and marveled at how much had changed in 12 short months. The woman looking back at her stood straighter, spoke clearer, and moved through the world with the assurance of someone whose value was recognized and respected by everyone around her. The processing that had once taken hours of anxiety and uncertainty now moved smoothly, efficiently, humanely. Sarah spoke directly to Carmen in careful, patient English, and when the child hesitated, Linda was there to translate, to encourage, to ensure that fear didn't prevent a family from accessing the protection they deserved. As they completed the final paperwork, Linda's phone buzzed with a text message from Noah, now 11 years old and in his second year at Lincoln Elementary School. The message was in English, written with the careful precision of a child who took pride in mastering a language that had once seemed impossible to understand. "Abuela Linda, I got an A+ on my science project. Mrs. Patterson says I can present it at the school assembly. Can you and Mama come watch? I want to tell everyone about the time you saved us and how heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear cleaning uniforms." Linda smiled as she read the message, her heart swelling with pride at Noah's academic success and his generous spirit that found heroism in ordinary kindness. Elena had graduated from her English classes and was now working as a medical interpreter at the same hospital where she had nearly died just over a year ago. The circle of her life had completed itself in the most beautiful way possible. She was now helping other Spanish-speaking patients navigate the medical system that had once seemed so hostile and incomprehensible. "Ms. Vasquez," Sarah's voice brought Linda back to the present moment. "I have good news for the Santos family. Their asylum application has been accepted for full review, and they've been assigned to Judge Rodriguez's court for their hearing." Maria Santos began crying with relief, understanding enough English to recognize that her daughter would be safe, that the nightmare journey they had endured had finally led them to sanctuary. Carmen looked up at her mother's tears with confusion, not yet understanding that these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Linda knelt down beside Carmen one more time, switching to Spanish to explain what had just happened. "Mija, you and your mama get to stay here. You're safe now. You can go to school, make friends, and never have to be afraid again. Carmen's face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire office, and she threw her small arms around Linda's neck with the spontaneous affection of a child whose burdens had suddenly been lifted from her shoulders. "Are you going to be our family too?" Carmen asked innocently, having heard Maria describe Linda as the angel who had appeared when they needed help most desperately. "I'm going to be whatever you need me to be," Linda replied, meaning every word. That's what people do for each other when they care. As they prepared to leave the immigration office, Linda caught sight of someone familiar near the entrance. Robert Henderson stood awkwardly by the door, looking significantly older and more worn than he had a year ago. His cleaning company had indeed lost most of its government contracts, and Linda had heard through mutual acquaintances that he was struggling to rebuild his business with a workforce that no longer trusted his commitment to treating employees with dignity. He approached Linda hesitantly, his previous arrogance replaced by something that might have been remorse. "Ms. Vasquez, I wanted to apologize for how I treated you that day. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I realize I was wrong." Linda studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse rather than mere regret at the consequences of his actions. After a moment, she extended her hand in a gesture of reconciliation that surprised both of them. "Mr. Henderson," she said quietly, "we all make choices every day about how we treat the people around us. What matters isn't that you made a mistake. It's what you do with the lesson you learned from it." Henderson shook her hand gratefully, his relief evident that she hadn't chosen to humiliate him in the same public way he had once humiliated her. "I want you to know that I've changed how I run my business. My employees now have paid sick days, and anyone who goes above and beyond to help someone in crisis gets rewarded, not punished." Linda nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. Maybe something good came out of a difficult situation after all." As Henderson walked away, Linda reflected on the strange ways that life sometimes came full circle. A year ago, she had been invisible, voiceless, powerless to change anything beyond the cleanliness of the floors she mopped. Today, she was a respected advocate whose opinion mattered to judges and officials, whose voice carried weight in rooms where important decisions were made. But more than professional recognition, more than financial security, more than any external measure of success, Linda had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a purpose that filled her soul, and a family that had chosen her just as she had chosen them. That evening, Linda sat in the audience at Lincoln Elementary School, watching Noah present his science project about how small actions can create big changes. He spoke with confidence and clarity about the butterfly effect in nature, using his own family's story as an example of how one person's decision to help could create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. "My abuela Linda taught me that heroes aren't people with superpowers," Noah said, looking directly at her in the audience with eyes that shone with love and gratitude. "Heroes are people who see someone who needs help and decide they're not going to walk away. They're people who choose kindness even when it's hard, even when it costs them something, even when no one is watching." The audience applauded enthusiastically, but Linda barely heard the sound over the beating of her own heart. She thought about the scared cleaning lady who had stood in this same school district's government building just over a year ago, frozen with indecision about whether to help a frightened child or protect her own job security. Eleanor reached over and squeezed Linda's hand, and in that simple gesture, Linda felt the weight of everything they had built together. Not just a family, but a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, compassion over convenience, courage over comfort. After the presentation, as they walked through the school hallways toward the parking lot, Noah slipped his hand into Linda's with the casual affection of a child who had never doubted that he was loved and wanted and protected. "Abuela Linda," he said, switching to Spanish the way he always did when he wanted to share something particularly important. "Do you think there are other families out there who need someone to help them the way you helped us?" Linda smiled, thinking about Maria and Carmen Santos, about the dozens of other families she worked with every month, about the countless people who moved through the world carrying burdens too heavy for them to bear alone. "Yes, mijo," she replied. "There are always people who need help. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether we're brave enough to see them and strong enough to care." Noah nodded seriously, as if he were filing away this wisdom for future use. "When I grow up, I want to help people too, like you and Judge Miguel. You already help people, Linda told him. Every time you translate for your mama at the grocery store, every time you help a new student at school feel welcome, every time you choose to be kind instead of easy, you're already changing the world. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or do you know someone who has experienced the invisible struggle of being overlooked, dismissed, or treated as less valuable because of their job, their status, or their circumstances? If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps us spread this message of hope and reminds us all that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. The invisible people who clean our buildings, serve our food and keep our world running deserve to be seen, heard and valued. They are mothers and fathers, dreamers and survivors, human beings with stories that matter just as much as anyone else's. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one behind the desk. It's the one who refuses to walk past someone in pain. Sometimes the janitor is the only angel anyone gets. And sometimes when we have the courage to choose compassion over convenience, we discover that helping others helps us find out who we're really meant to be. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching.